what Illinois students and school districts need, we wanted to really make sure that we were actually listening to those communities. So we needed to first convene tables in a virtual setting to try to hear from the communities that are actually being affected by this pandemic in Illinois specifically. And as we try to do that work, as I said at the top, what we are trying to do is kind of have this mutually reinforcing cycle of learning and understanding those challenges and problems, and then using kind of coalition building and advocacy to try to solve them as a collective. And Jess, please jump in if I miss anything or if you want to add anything. And I'm going to kick it to Jess, who really kind of orchestrated a lot of the research and methodology of this particular large-scale qualitative study to kind of talk us through how that all went.
Thanks, Melissa. So to start off, right, I just mentioned that, you know, in a normal, quote unquote, normal situation, we would have done a lot of this in person. And the reality is that we may have been limited in the ways that we were able to engage such a diverse group of people. So with the help of many partners across the state, we engaged over 120 parents, caregivers, and students from rural, urban, and suburban communities to hear directly from them how the COVID-19 pandemic was impacting their schooling experiences. And as you can see in the map and even in the pie chart, you can see that we engaged an extremely diverse group of people that was very representative of the students that we serve and the students that we want to advocate with and on behalf of. And we engage participants of different, you know, racial, regional, and socioeconomic backgrounds. We had parents of children with special needs and varying linguistic abilities. And to name, really, it was extremely important for us to ensure that our participants represented the diversity of our state, the diverse experiences, the realities, the opportunities that folks have access to as well. So really, you know, I want to dig into the findings, and I hope that this also encourages you to dig into the report because it's very rich and it tells the story of many different communities in our state and many stories that we found were similar, although in different regional areas. So we started every single conversation by asking caregivers and students how the COVID-19 pandemic was impacting their communities. To us, it was extremely important to acknowledge that, you know, in addition to understanding their educational experiences as it related to the academic experience, that we understood overall how, you know, what are communities dealing with right now. And one of the biggest challenges that they named was that, you know, across every single focus group, they named that there was a lack of access to childcare. This was especially true for households in which both parents are essential workers, and it was making it more challenging for them to be able to support their children, both academically and social-emotionally. And also, you know, in this new reality where many had to pivot into this virtual world, even if now we're, you know, many seeing hybrid and some even full in-person situations in schooling right now. In addition to that, and as many, I'm sure many of you all know because you all are on the ground, you're serving our communities, we also learned that our communities are experiencing increased financial insecurity, right? And this was especially true for immigrant and working class families, sharing an emphasized focus on ensuring that the basic needs of their children were being met. And we also heard about the barriers of accessing healthcare and mental health services. And some of them shared that they were afraid of the accrued costs that may come with contracting COVID-19. You know, we heard from some students about stories that their families share, recipes that their families were sharing to try to get creative to avoid seeking treatment for fear of what might happen in the long run. In our rural communities, we especially heard the issue about the challenges of obtaining COVID-19 testing, leading to students missing up to 14 days and even more of that in order to quarantine to make sure to keep the other students in their community safe. And overall, really, we heard about the role that schools once played and continue to play as community hubs, where families seek all of these services and all of these supports in ways that have been made more challenging given our current realities. And, you know, with all of that in mind, I also want to name that our communities are extremely resilient, right? And with that resilience, we also acknowledge that there are some very real challenges that none of us have faced in the past. And, you know, the other thing that came up in every single conversation, whether it was with a parent, a student, or a caregiver, was their gratitude that they have for the educators in the community. So a lot of you all on the line are educators today, and I'm sure you know you've gotten many thank yous, many calls, and our students in our communities see that. They see the work that you're doing. They see that you're working tirelessly to make sure that you're serving the needs of the students and the community. But despite that, you know, the other reality was that there are some real systemic problems that have made it more challenging for you all to serve your communities. And we wanted to dig into that a little bit deeper so that we can be informed in our advocacy. So as we go into the next sections, you'll hear about some of those challenges that they named, where, you know, we want to really make sure that we're being informed about our advocacy around, and that we are elevating equity and supporting our teachers every single step of the way. So the other area in which we dove into with our communities was around social, emotional, and mental health supports. And throughout every single conversation, whether it was rural, urban, or suburban, there was the naming of an explicit need for these supports. So, you know, before we begin to think about the academic recovery of our students, we need to first honor the humanity of our students and the experiences. Again, this is, you know, a shock to all of us. And to an extent, it is also trauma that we're all collectively experiencing. But the reality is that some students are experiencing it at a higher rate than others. And some of the things that our students named, first of all, they're feeling socially isolated and distant. Right? The reality is that some of our students that are learning in person, even if in person, have to, you know, follow some measures to keep distant from other students. There are ways that they interacted in the past, you know, before March of last year, are different than our students are interacting in person right now. In the same vein, our students that are in person, in video, you know, learning remotely, fully remotely right now, shared stories about never having met or seen the faces of some of their classmates because, you know, our students, for the most part, keep their videos off while they're learning. And interestingly enough, even during our focus groups, our students were not turning their videos on. And, you know, for you know, the matter of equity, we were not asking for that. But these are things that we noticed in those conversations too. In addition to that, our students and caregivers identified an increased need for counselor and social worker support and capacity. And, you know, again, there's a lot of educators on the call today, and you can speak to this issue as well. This has existed even before the pandemic came to, you know, to Illinois and to our current reality. But there's a higher need than ever before to make sure that we're supporting our students social, emotionally, and in their mental health and wellness as well. In addition to that, our participants recognize the growing unmet social emotional needs and concerns about the delayed development of the vital skills. And we heard stories from our parents, especially, about concerns for the youngest learners, right? These are key developmental years for some of our early learners, those of our students in early childhood, in pre-K through third grade, and they're missing those opportunities for the interactive play. It's much more challenging to do it, and we're having to find ways to get really creative. And when I say we, I really, you know, again, cannot speak so much more highly of the educators that are working around the clock to make sure that those opportunities are provided. And with that being said, I'll kick it to Melissa to share some about the learning experiences of students.
Thanks, Jess. Excellent. So I think as we went through the conversations with our students and parents and caregivers, one of the things that we noticed was that people were sharing things that fell kind of neatly into separate buckets, right? So we heard from Jess about the kind of community level factors and themes that people were experiencing. We also really heard that significant importance of social, emotional, and mental health needs and supports that our students and families were experiencing. And then the other kind of large bucket that we heard was just the academic side of things, like what are students experiencing in terms of their learning, their growth, what are barriers there that we could potentially help to break down. And so the first thing that we heard from students and from caregivers was that the quantity and quality of instruction has changed, and students' ability to access rigorous coursework has also changed over the course of the pandemic. as Jess said, there are kind of, we've all been adjusting to the new reality of delivering instruction in modalities that we never had to kind of practice, have professional development around. The scaffolding and structure wasn't necessarily in place to just quickly pivot to that. Nonetheless, educators have kind of gone above and beyond to make those modalities work, but we know that we still have things like a digital divide that make it difficult for kids to access those things. One thing we did hear is that there are certain constructs that are helping make this easier for districts. So districts, for example, that had already started to focus on things like competency-based education found it a bit easier to continue to provide rigorous coursework, even when they had to change their mode of delivering instruction, because it was just a more flexible way to deliver instruction. You can see the quotes on the right-hand side. It stands to reason that anything that involves kind of manipulables or hands-on activities like chemistry labs or in-person practice like Spanish class would really be affected by this switch in how we're teaching and learning. And this is what we heard primarily from the high school students, that they were missing these hands-on kind of activities when they were kind of switching to remote instruction. On the kind of caregiver side especially, what we heard was this hunger for knowledge, hunger for insight into how their students are performing in this new circumstance. So any kind of touch points with educators were of very, very high value to the participants in our focus groups. Both students and caregivers said they really just wanted to know if they were on track, how they were making progress, where they needed to push a little bit harder to grow and catch up. Because it feels like, to some extent, where those things might have been clearer with in-person instruction, there's a little bit of a risk of things becoming a black box when we're in the virtual world. So they really valued kind of feedback directly from teachers and educators, or any kinds of score reports, written or verbal feedback on assignments, those kinds of things. The other thing we learned is that caregivers really are kind of versatile and able to rely on multiple data points to do that sense-making work of understanding where their kids are, where they're thriving, and where their areas for growth are. We were curious to know what types of data parents prioritize and find valuable. And so this is just a quick rundown of a poll that we gave them, broken down by kind of region of the state or type of neighborhood that they live in. And we found that, as you guys can see, by and large, it seemed important to folks to be able to have some kind of comparison to state standards to know whether their kids were on track. Students especially value that teacher feedback. We know that that's obviously incredibly important. And graded work remains really valuable as a way for both students and caregivers to really have insight into how they're performing. And we know from research on college preparedness and persistence that graded work actually does really correlate to how well our kids do as they go through their educational continuum. Another thing that we wanted to ask folks, and I think many of you have probably heard that as the new federal dollars are coming in to support learning recovery, this is something that Superintendent Ayala has encouraged districts to think about as a potential way to support learning recovery, is the notion of adding time. Whether this is adding time to the school day, to the school year, doing extended summer school, after school activities, there are a bunch of creative different ways that you could potentially increase the amount of face time you have with students once we actually can get back in person and have that face time. And research tends to show that type of, just adding that rich touch points with students can really help them to recover after this kind of crisis. So knowing that from the research base, we wanted to see how parents and students felt about that as a proposal. So we asked them what types of additional time would they be more inclined to support or see as valuable. And so we see in the pie chart here that over a third of our respondents thought that a longer year would be the most useful way to add time in order to help with learning renewal after COVID. Less than a third thought that a longer day, about a quarter thought that a longer day would be useful. So having kids in the school building, either starting earlier or ending later. And then about a quarter thought that year-round instruction was potentially kind of a creative and useful way to deal with what we talk about as like summer slide or summer melt. So I think that section of participants really felt that the most damaging things to student growth or learning is when we have those really long breaks, like the 2 or 3 month summer, where we can see that kids start to kind of fall back. And so potentially a solution would be to have shorter through the school year. Okay, so that was the kind of academic trends and themes that we heard in our focus groups. The last big theme that we really just want to make sure we highlight, and should come as no surprise to you guys with the work that you do, is just that we really heard by and large from both students and parents that there really has to be a consistent focus on equity if we are truly going to kind of not just recover, but thrive as a state going forward. We already briefly touched on the first kind of sub-theme of this, which is the impact of the digital divide. And I think it's interesting to think about what we heard from our students and parents was that it's not enough to think of digital divide as getting devices or internet connectivity into the hands of students. There's another set of steps after that that are needed, right? So there's digital literacy on the part of students and caregivers so that they can actually use that technology once it's in their hands. We heard, for example, from a lot of grandparents or people who were working at the same time as they were trying to support their kids' learning, who just needed additional support in order to be able to be tech literate so they could do that work. We also heard that PD and training and supports for educators is critical here. Like we said, this is not a modality that we've had to rely on so heavily in the past. So really giving teachers the support to leverage this in a productive way is critical to close that digital divide. The second set of kind of equity targets that we found focused on funding disparities. And so Illinois is actually pretty unique in the sense that we have a funding formula, the evidence-based funding formula, that actually shows really clearly where we're doing a great job of funding our schools and where we have really great disparities in terms of funding equity, and we have a long way to go in terms of fully funding most of our schools. Right now, I think about 80% of students in Illinois or more are in districts that are below 90% of full funding. What's worse is that more than half of the students in our state are in districts funded below 70% of full funded. That's pretty crazy. In terms of racial equity, more than 8 out of every 10 Black and Latino students are in those least well-funded districts compared to 5 out of 10 white students. So funding is a huge source of equity gaps in Illinois. The evidence-based formula has started to help close those gaps, but what we heard from parents especially is that they see this play out on the ground. So I can rattle off those statistics day and night, but what matters is that parents are seeing that translates into some districts having, all of the guidance counselors and social workers and, language teachers that they could possibly need, while others struggle to find and retain those professionals. So closing those funding gaps are going to be a critical step in order to make sure that we can actually recover and thrive. Finally, the last thing we heard, and we touched on this a little bit at the top, is just this need to keep the eye on the ball when it comes to offering our students rigorous and engaging coursework. And so we saw parents kind of hoping that their students would be able to have access to things like AP courses, advanced coursework, dual enrollment, these things that really should build a bridge to their future success in terms of college and career, which is another one of our kind of 60 by 25 focus areas. But this just wasn't available in all districts, and COVID in some senses derailed the ability of certain students to access those things. The other thing that we saw is that when students were able to be in AP classes, dual enrollment, these classes that tend to have a higher bar for success or be tied to an external kind of measure of success like an AP test, those students tended to report that they were getting really high quality instruction even through COVID. Whereas kids who were in kind of like the regular track or who didn't have access to things like AP classes felt as though they were no longer being challenged. So it'll be really important as we go forward to think about how we make sure all students are feeling challenged and are supported to meet those challenges. Okay, so I'm going to quickly wrap up with the recommendations that Advance Illinois kind of took a step back after we did all of that listening and heard those kind of themes that we just walked through for you guys. And then we thought, well, how could we use all of this information to inform a concrete, simple set of recommendations to the state that they should consider as they design any types of interventions for the sake of COVID recovery. And what we came out with Shouldn't be surprising given what we've talked about already. The first is investing in resource equity. And so that means funding the evidence-based funding formula, making sure the state appropriates at least $350 million every year for that formula so we can continue to make progress to close those equity gaps we talked about. But we know we don't only have state resources, we also have a lot of federal dollars coming in right now. So trying to make sure that those dollars are spent as equitably as possible and really targeted to students and communities that have been hardest hit and need them most. The second thing is really treating academic and social emotional learning as two halves of the whole child. So kind of no longer doing this siloed approach to education where you either focus on one or the other, or you only focus on academics to the exclusion of social emotional learning and mental health supports. We really need to think of our kids holistically and support them as such. The third is recognizing that a comprehensive recovery is going to need to take the long view. So anything the state does to support school districts and schools shouldn't just focus on immediate crisis response. They really have to be planning on multiple time horizons and thinking, what are districts going to be needing in the next 2 years, 4 years, 6 years in order to truly kind of build momentum out of this crisis. The fourth is prioritizing clarity and consistency. And so this means both in terms of guidance that the state provides to districts, those really need to be simple, clear, consistent, not conflicting with other agencies, for example. And then also there needs to be supports in order for districts to be able to provide data back to families and communities in a way that's clear and consistent. And then finally, we get back to the notion of making up lost time. So whether it's supported by federal dollars, state dollars, however it needs to be done, and with the knowledge that districts need flexibility to figure out the best fit for them in terms of adding time, we do think that the research and what we heard from parents and students suggests that adding time, in-person time, to the school day or school year in the future could really be a catalyst for helping students recover. So that was a lot, and it covers the breadth of a lot of conversations, and it's still a little bit abstract because it's kind of all focused on this policy and advocacy side of things. So what we really wanted to do is bring in someone who's been thinking about these things and doing this work on the ground in a school district. So that's why Keisa Garrett is here with us. And I'm going to kick it to you, Keisa. If you're okay, I can move the slides forward as you talk through it.
Sure.
Awesome, thanks.
All right, good morning again, all. I'm Keisa Garrett again, Chief of Schools for School District 189 in East St. Louis. On behalf of Superintendent Arthur Culver and the staff of East St. Louis, we really thank you, Jessica Melissa of Advanced Illinois, for allowing us this chance to share and learn about how this pandemic is affecting the field of education, and in particular, the lives and education of our students. I want to briefly give you a reflection of the work that we have been doing in East St. Louis. We are a public pre-K through 12 school district. You can advance, I'm sorry, Melissa. In Southern Illinois, St. Clair County, Region 4. We service about 5,000 students in about 5 municipalities. For any of the group, if you would like to have more information about our district, please feel free to visit estl189.com. Scroll down and you'll see a lot of the good work that the schools and our staff have been doing to reach out to families during this time period. So really, what are our most pressing challenges facing students in East St. Louis as a result of this pandemic? And so we definitely started our work focusing on 4 key goals throughout this pandemic, and really taking time out to be long range in our thinking. We did start to plan about 2 weeks prior to Governor Pritzker's announcement about school closure, just thinking about the impact that we may have to as a community close just because of the needs of our community and students. And so by the time we heard the March announcement, we were ready with all items to start programming such as the Grab and Go program. And I think the only thing that was amiss at the time was whether or not to send technology home. And then we quickly, as we have been debating, made that decision a few days after our school closure announcements. And so just for context, again, I'll be presenting from the district point of view and from really a practitioner point of view. And I really appreciate the work that you all have done in gathering information from students and parents, as we know that's a lot of the work that we'll have to do moving forward. And then research such as yours really gives us a foundation for that work. So our four basic goals during the pandemic were first, definitely always to provide a safe and healthy environment for our staff and for our students and families. And so we have been remote since spring of 2020. And that was a tough decision as we've wanted our students and our staff back in school because we know that is the best option for our students. But safety was our number one and first concern as it related to this time period. So we definitely want to ensure that our students have their daily opportunity to continue to learn with the Illinois standards. And so we looked at with our task forces and our groups, all the different models of learning or modes of learning. And for the sake of argument, during our remote period, our students did receive 5 days face-to-face virtual with teaching staff, qualified and certified teaching staff that really we were in the middle of the debate whether or not to move to hybrid or not. And so a part of that was to give them that full time and to maximize that instructional loss and the resources available to student teachers by aligning their schedule, the after school activities, and to continue to support the deficiencies in learning. So number four, we wanted to provide students and families with routine structures and support to meet academic and social emotional needs. We knew throughout this pandemic that the decisions we made, we had to consider our community, our families, our staff, and everyone in those decision-making processes. So when we look at what our most pressing challenges are for students, we definitely looked from that point of view of the district, and we have gathered some of the same understanding that you have more informally, just talking to students and families around the community. Definitely that financial burden, that need for older students to become caregivers at home and to even work during the school day, which is a really huge challenge for our high school teachers. But if we look at this document, I'll just go over a few and really just from the student point of view, how to best support the students currently with their social emotional health, the trauma and social recovery of the students. And so that is our foremost challenge. We do try different strategies and we do have very good teams on that. But again, we already had an environment where students had such adverse childhood experiences. And now on top of that, you add the effects of the pandemic that we really definitely have. That is one of our most pressing challenges. And then we looked at it in a twofold way as well, how to continue to best support and monitor grade recovery at this point and academic loss for students. And so those are, from our point of view, the most pressing challenges. And we definitely will continue to do the work to gather our student and our families' feelings and opinions and to support all of that throughout these next few years. So we have worked as a district to really understand the breadth and depth of this need as best as possible during the pandemic. When we went into the closure, it was a very immediate process, which really did provide a little period of isolation. And so number one was really how to continue our communication platforms, but really how to make them more of a two-way and more intense in terms of communication to our families, parents, and the communities. And so we definitely already had a platform. Our superintendent's platforms reach out to community groups and parents. There's a meeting we call the KCN. We have a meeting that reaches out to our staff in schools, the superintendent staff advisory council, and then we have the superintendent student advisory council, where we actually meet with students from our high school and middle school to get their perspective as well. So those platforms were already in place, but they became even more important during the pandemic. Our communications on social media, on our district website became lifelines. Having a way for parents to communicate back to the district was of the utmost importance. So even having a 24-hour email question response was important for most of our departments. And then being able to man that around the clock was just as important. Secondly, we monitored the COVID positivity data for our zip codes and our staff cases as well to be able to determine if it was feasible for us to come back to school. And we've been looking at that since April of last school year. And it has really been informing our decision making as we've at times had up to 30% of the positivity rate of our county down here in St. Clair County. So we also continue just as a baseline to provide support and resources for families, as well as those educational needs that our families needed to help students meet the goals of the school in their academic day. We provided evolving professional development for teachers and staff to meet academic and social needs of families and students. And so while those two things are baselines, those things continue to inform what we need for students at this time. So I call it the good work because even though we've been doing this work of supporting communities and families, the pandemic just really highlighted our understanding as educators that, we really do and must meet basic needs. And at some points during the pandemic, that seemed to take precedent, over everything. And so we have done some really intense work as a district to try to understand the needs of our community and our parents and to try to provide those resources. We've definitely maintained and updated specific communication from the district to families, and we make sure we get that out in all the different modes. As within our community, we do have some digital device still, even with students having the resources at home. So we provide it in our Facebook and Twitter pages, our district website, as well as the local paper. We do a Sky Alert call to our families to make sure that they understand where to go and seek the information. But those updates include critical information, FAQ information for parents and staff and students so that they can understand where the district stands at the time. We've also wanted to support our parents, as that was really the toughest point at the beginning of closure, to help them understand some of the technology that's being used with students. We are a Google district, and so our students do use Google platforms. Our teachers use them as well. They use Zoom as well and other platforms, but Google is our primary platform. And so we definitely wanted our parents and even our grandparents and guardians to understand how to support students. And the younger the students, the more support we had to give to parents. So we did provide a technology hotline. You can see one of the thumbnails on the side where our parents could call. Initially, we started with just the technology guide, which was a very good technology guide. If you check our website, it has pictures and illustrations, but we knew that for the needs of our community, they needed someone to talk to face-to-face that they could call as well. We definitely wanted to continue to provide our family with any food resources that were needed. And so our school, several schools in the district provide community food giveaways. They've partnered with different groups to make sure that happens for our families. And we definitely supported the state and our families when they needed to apply for the PEBT and for any other resources. So as you can see, there was a myriad of resources that are provided, but really, even though you see all the thumbnails and they're on the district website, the real art of this right now was making sure that our staff helped our families navigate all of that. So that face-to-face and person and being able to call a hotline or call someone was very important. We absolutely have the student support text helpline, which was really key and important at the very start, where students could call and report crisis or speak to someone if they were feeling worried or anxious. And that was through our district. We also provided resources in the community for our parents if they had, similar feelings of anxiety or needed someone to speak with. But that crisis hotline ended up being 24 hours. Our social workers, teachers, and our staff really do attend to the needs of our students. And so we really knew we needed to have a hotline for students to be able to reach to when needed. Being able to support and monitor the overall well-being of our staff, students, and community. Our parent student support services and SLA team did the 24-hour crisis line. Our district SEL team, in addition, does a Wellness Wednesday, and that reaches out to our parents, our lead parents and parent groups, and some of our SEL staff. Our cabinet and our teams update and monitor that community data on zip codes to inform our board and inform our decision-making about whether or not to return to school. And so just a little more, a few pictures of the good work. You get to see some of our schools and staffs partnering with the agencies, passing out food. Our district also, in partnership with our local health department, we were able to give vaccinations to our staff who requested or who opted to vaccinate. We definitely have the grab and go program that you see a picture of there at the end of the screen with some of our students receiving it. And that would have been March of last year. I think I was on the bus taking that picture, and it was right at the start of the pandemic. So when I look back at this picture, I go, no one has on a mask. But this was right at literally the day after the first day we started serving students. And so again, more of the good work as it relates to the academic side of things for students. We wanted to support schools and teachers with implementing their academic schedule and safety measures. Our stakeholder groups, which really was a very intense group of about 50 individuals. It was our parents, teachers, principals, directors, and some community members actually got together last spring and into the summer and really designed guidance for all three modes of learning that we have used throughout the year to be able to provide guidance to our teaching staff. And there were really two components of that group, which was the group that focused on safety and health, and the part of the group that focused on the curriculum and academic scheduling. And so we, again, used the ISB guidance or IDPH guidance as a baseline, but then formed our own local guidance. And from that, our groups were able to design our own guidance for staff to be able to use to form scheduling throughout the school day, as well as safety protocols. It helped anchor our professional development, as well as we provided professional development for our support staff and our teaching staff that dealt with just really the safety protocol right now. And then the academic and others professional development dealt with more of the engagement strategies at this time. So one big support for teachers at this time was technology integration support. We do have technology integration specialists within the district who work hand in hand with teachers, but they're also working with parents at this time. So of course, they provided professional development that would individually meet the needs of teachers, but also meet the needs of groups of teachers, making sure that those teachers who wanted or needed baseline training were trained, but those teachers who were more advanced. And we do have advanced staff as we've been using the Google platform, and our students have been one-on-one on campus. But we also know that the needs of our staff are varying needs. So we learned so much from this journey that I could have done 20 slides and notes. And I'm only going to pick a few things we learned, and even missed a couple. And even it's last evening, I like, we could have added more that our group learned. But I'm just going to pick out a few for school districts who if we would ever have to go through this again, or just really to continue our thought in the long range, that we look at our ISB and IDPH guidance and FAQs is a great foundation tool. But really getting with your local groups, your stakeholders, and being able to understand your local context helps you to form local guidance for learning plans and for safety for students. Make sure to include your key stakeholders, your groups, the people who have to implement this day to day, those teachers that are in the classroom, the support staff that will be supporting, and then those principals and directors who will be supporting those people at the schools. Parents are key stakeholder. And we did not, and it's just something that we didn't think about. We did not have our student groups there in that discussion, but we did have discussions with our student councils throughout the school year just to inform more decision making, making sure that the monies that are designated for the school district are aligned to those plans that your teams develop. So if you develop a safety protocol, then you make sure that that's how it aligns directly to your budgets. Connecting with remote families is the most important during this pandemic. And so it is necessary to have staff who are connecting with students every day, even those students who are present, just to make sure that their social and emotional health is well, also to make sure they're doing well, see if their family has any needs. One of the big learns from this is that our second language families could not be supported by the staff that we currently had. We had to actually contract with Hoyleton to be able to provide additional services to our families, and specifically our Spanish-speaking families. That is the largest second language speaking families in our district. And so we definitely had to go outside of the district's resources to be able to make sure that we met the needs of those families. And so one of the other areas that we learned is that you definitely consult other school districts with this work, especially those who are moving into the hybrid model. We definitely were consulting to see how they were doing. And we noted some of them had to have the hybrid model start, then they had to revert when cases got high. And for our community, that would have presented a frustration, it would have presented uncertainty and more anxiety. And so it really helped our decision making. Definitely listening to your community is a very key point during this time. And so we gather survey data from our parents late spring, early summer last year to inform our decisions about school. And currently, we have about 55% of our families who would like to send their students back in person, and we are scheduled to come back in person with students March 10. So about 45% of our families still at this time do not feel safe. And that is even with Region 4, which again is one of the, if not for most of the pandemic, has been the worst in terms of being on the warning list and having the highest number of cases. Even with the cases, improving in Southern Illinois and in Region 4, we still have 45% of the parents in our community who do not feel safe sending their students to school. So monitoring that local data by the zip codes that your school services was so key. And it was just an eye opener for us. We were looking at the county rates, we were looking at the region rates, but then we looked specifically at our zip code. Our city does not have a hospital for our students. And so that was one thing. Our health services and school-based clinics had to close during the pandemic. And so just knowing that those baseline health services were not there as well, that was one of the information keys that we kept in mind. But looking at how our zip code would be impacted if we as a school, made an early decision to open and not thinking about those things would have been really key. So more lessons learned. Technology tools are essential. We definitely did not want the digital divide. We were really having debates about that for those 3 weeks prior to planning. And it really just got down to it. Our students and staff must have that connection and communication for learning. And so just for districts who are doing that work, definitely organizing by family number, making sure your staff have access to the distribution data and clear systems for distribution accountability and lost and stolen items, et cetera, for that purpose. And so we're doing very well, actually. And we're not seeing anything that's hiding or any worries with our distribution, as our students have had their machines since last March. We're using the grading guidance from ISB was key. And when you presented today, it really made me think about the students and how those last spring grade adjustments affected them. Really taking that guidance, but looking at your context, your grading system, your grading procedures, how it will affect students long-term is really key in making the actual local guidance for your school district. Providing a 24-hour response system for parents and community is key. We enacted questions at ESTL 189 and everything from how can I get my transcript to my child's school isn't responding to where's my grab and go stop were questions that we were getting 24 hours. And it was all of our work to after the workday just to keep checking back in to make sure we responded to those parents. And so again, I could have added more slides with lessons learned and kept going. One of the key factors during this pandemic was to really establish an even closer relationship with our local health department. We looked at our pandemic and public health crisis procedures. They were amended, but we definitely did everything with consultation of our health department. Everything that was done in terms of the quarantine and isolation work within the district, the contact tracing, we really needed the help of our local health department to inform that decision. Even decisions about whether or not to open school, they were able to give us more local data as related to our city and our area that informed our decisions. And I think for this forum, the final lesson I would like to really express is that job duties for everyone changed during this pandemic. And so we all became everything. And so all team members must be willing, able, and available to serve in whatever needed capacity for our students and our family. We had several staff, including our security guards, our teachers, teachers' aides, central office staff, whose job duties became everything from joining the grab and go to hand out lunches to students, visiting homes, to making calls. And we didn't have a complaint. There was no need for official bargaining, our bargaining units. And we all came together to support our students in our community. So this was more of an unwritten understanding. And so as Dr. King stated, we have some difficult days ahead of us. I would just say that we have some very deliberate and prudent planning and work to do. And back to your end, long range planning that's really going to require the resilience and endurance of the organization and of our staff to be able to support our students. And so as we look at the months ahead, I just wanted to briefly share some of the considerations right now. And one of them really does involve being able to make sure we consult Advanced Illinois research and those who are doing the work to find out how families and communities are affected, and doing our local work as well to be able to adjust our planning long range. And so we looked at two areas, when we're looking at two areas, and we call it grade and social recovery, if you will. So that grade recovery is really recovering that academic loss for growth, as it would be measured on standardized tests, but definitely even within our grading system. Looking at that social recovery, our students have been isolated from peers and from teachers and from those who they really have been close to for now, nearly a year. And so when we look at social recovery, we want to continue and really be more robust about supporting our PBIS and social emotional learning teams at the schools to help them maintain that climate and culture within the schools that really supports the students. Our schools do use that twofold look at education. We look at those cultural factors and those instructional factors whenever we think about students. And so making sure our universal practices are sound, and then also refining our individual and group work with students that will need that for the targeted and more comprehensive support. Maintaining our partnerships with our mental health and our health partners will be so key at this time. And going back to offering sports and our special activities, following all guidelines and remembering to be safe, but also having transition plans for those new activities that students will want to start. Making sure we gather more data from our students on their interest in school and social activities. Supporting embedded and ongoing professional development for our staff to understand and meet the needs of learners during this time period. And in terms of grade recovery, other academic work that we must do, we'll be able to continue to support that core instruction and viable curriculum, but we will definitely have to vet and develop guidance on student learning regressions and the needs during this time period. And so we'll have to assess and analyze student growth data to provide actions for this regression. In addition, we'll have to analyze any new gaps. We primarily service African American students and about 1% of Hispanic students. And so we know that our students were already in a gap from their peers, but we don't know how that gap is widened because we know that everybody will be experiencing a gap at this time, but definitely analyzing that gap plus the individual student growth or loss in their academic progress. And then really being able to understand that to be able to move our instruction and our learning plans forward. Meeting with our bargaining units to extend that time is going to be so important. We know the research does show, as Melissa and Jessica mentioned already, that the extending time for students is of most importance. We'll be currently working with our stakeholders again to decide on whether or not to extend the school year or school hours. And those plans will deviate over the next few years. We might be able to choose this year to do a traditional summer school or an extended year. Next year might need to be an extended day. And it'll really be for the next few years that we'll have to address these additional instructional time gaps. But I do, on the end, believe that just education itself is evolving and changing. And so that we may see changes that will stay with us, and we may see changes that are things that were more short term. But thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Keisha. As you were speaking, it was just incredible to kind of see all of the different points of like parallels and connections between what we heard from so many different communities across the state and what you guys have been experiencing. And several things you said kind of just struck me, like the importance of collecting this data to have the insights into what students actually need. And this notion of partnering to get resources when you don't necessarily have them available at the district level itself. I think that really jives with the kind of collective impact work of 60 by 25 also. Thank you. So I think we have about 7 minutes left for Q&A, and I do see we have a couple questions in the chat already. So I'm going to kick it to Jessica to kind of moderate us through some questions.
Yeah, and I mean, I just want to echo that too. I can't like stop expressing my gratitude for the work that you all are doing, for your willingness to share your wealth of knowledge and your lessons and the experiences of yourself, the students that you're serving, the educators in your community. It really does seem like the work that you're doing is community informed and it's driven by the needs of what you're seeing in the moment. So with that all in mind, definitely echoing in the chat that you're doing incredible work. We have a question from Molly that says, what role do you see community-based organizations, such as summer and after-school programs, playing in grade and social recovery?
Okay, very good question. And so I would think for social recovery, definitely making sure there are opportunities, safe opportunities for students to engage with peers of their own age or even in mentoring ages. But in the grade recovery, just providing experience for students that they've missed over the past year and doing it in a way that's safe. I know that all of us, including those community-based groups, will have to think of transition plans that are safe, maybe not, all students attending, some, how many, but definitely things like field trips or experiences that they've had in those after school times or out of school times should return in some form or fashion. But definitely, at the end, having the goal of returning to some sense of normalcy for students. But that would be my response would be for that.
Thank you. One more. What new things that you implemented over the past year do you think the district will keep doing in the future? And that's also from Molly.
Okay, so I think our response to students, even our social emotional learning platforms and the work that our SEL teams do with trauma was really cutting edge, or beginning to be cutting edge within the district before the pandemic. And so really having a robust system of social workers and counselors and even teaching staff who work to support students around the clock was something that was happening within our district. And so this pandemic time just really brought more of a need for that 24-hour support. And our district actually just received a new ICEJA grant where they'll have a wraparound center that will do work in nights and weekends to be able to reach out to families and students who are in need. And so just really extending the support beyond the school day is more of what how we will move forward.
Yeah, really speaking to the holistic support, right? And meeting the student needs, in a holistic level. We don't have any more questions, but if any other folks on the line have anything else they'd like to ask, feel free to put it in the chat or in the Q&A. And other than that, I can kick it back to you, Melissa.
Thanks, Jess. I'll stop sharing so that we can see each other's faces. But yeah, I just want to say thank you again. I think that this has been, as you mentioned, Keisha, just like a journey of evolution and kind of rolling with the punches and really trying to adapt at the individual level, the family level, and the community and district level. And so it's really helpful, I think, to see how the work is playing out and just learn these lessons from each other. So I so appreciate you taking the time to share East St. Louis's journey and answer some of our questions. And thank you all as participants for kind of sticking with us. If you're interested in seeing the full report and full narrative of the education in a pandemic, then you can go to Advance Illinois' website, and I believe it'll probably also be linked in some of the conference materials. And then the slides from today's presentation, including Keisha's section with all of those great kind of lessons learned and planning for the road ahead, will be available probably also on that conference website. You can keep an eye out for that. If you'd like this stuff emailed directly to you that we shared today, you can go ahead and give us a direct message in the chat just to the panelists, and we can send it out to you as well. We want to make, open lines of communication, I think, was one of the takeaways that Keisha shared, and I think that's definitely something that we want to keep going, just sending out information as much as we can. So thank you all. We really appreciate it. We'll give you 3 minutes back before your next conference session.
Thanks for joining, everyone. Take care.